Hi. In this presentation, I'm going to go over your research paper as like a big, broad overview. So far, we've started the very beginning of it. I don't want you to get too far ahead. And now what I would do is kind of give you where we're going to go after the midterm. So in our brainstorm phase, a few of you were able to see that we're moving away from phenomena as things. Phenomena is the thing that we believe that we experience in life. But in reality, it's based on our perception and our lived experience and our language and our culture and kind of this very complicated thing. So what we want to do is make that concept of a thing, so less of an object and more of a socially constructed cause. So for example, I'm on a research team about homelessness, and I'm focusing on the structural causes of homelessness or the social relations that cause homelessness. Because, for example, there's no homelessness in the lion community in the savannah. So homelessness is a term that's been developed since the 1930s in the United States based on displacement after economic catastrophe. So 30 million humans have filed for unemployment because of the pandemic and the related shutdown. And some portion of those people will qualify as homeless as defined by the New York City government. So homelessness is a concept that's defined by government and then applied to certain people. That's different than saying housing insecurity or transientness, or there's a lot of different ways to describe the condition of a human being. But what I'm looking at and what you're looking at in this class are what are the structural causes? What are the things that we create that then create these issues that we have to deal with as a socially, organized society? So we want to change the idea that change happens outside of your brain. And we want to start with the idea that you're going to come up with what change is necessary because you're a part of the social structure. And so any change that you propose within society, you'd also have to follow. So we're going to do this by using different ideas than your previously held beliefs. So the reason why I got so much data from you at the beginning is then to use with you to help you confront your previously held beliefs. And we're going to complicate those and make those more dynamic as you continue to do your research. And I'm going to teach you how to do empirical research along the way. Here we need to see law as social change, but with choices. So law as social change within the court system. So we have choices to sue. Sometimes you have to defend a lawsuit, but you might also make the choice not to start a lawsuit. You might do a media campaign to try to raise awareness. You might try to organize people and have them pressure the local government. So law is one of those things that creates the game, if you put it that way, the rules of the game, and it gives you the choices of how to pursue your rights within that structure. I really emphasize this, and I'm going to keep kind of putting pressure on you to make sure that your inquiry question, the thing that you're trying to study, the phenomenon that you're trying to study, is specific, concise, well-defined, and that you provide a context. The context are the variables, so it's the things that you're trying to compare. The definitions should come from the UN reports, or they should come up from a federal government report or an academic article. They should not come from Webster or from Merriam's dictionary or Dictionary Online. So I want to help you just try to make sure that that part is well constructed, because if you don't do the inquiry well, then the rest of the paper is going to suffer. So basically, even though it feels like it's pretty slow, it feels like it's a difficult process and it's probably frustrating. If you do a poor inquiry question, then you could basically set yourself up to get a C in the class. And I'm just trying to avoid that as quickly as possible. So that's mainly what I'm going to be focusing on. When you're ready and when you have a well-defined thesis statement and one that's been able to kind of lead the research, then we're going to switch over to the thesis statement. And this is difficult at first if you're not used to practicing it. And my goal is that you'll practice it enough that this will become comfortable for you. So you should notice the similarity between thesis and hypothesis, right? So, or hypothesis is what you're probably used to saying it as. But what you're doing is you're testing evidence from existing data. So you're not inventing anything, right? We're not fiction writers. We're not making a movie. We're taking existing data that is here in the universe, here in our reality, and we're testing it. We're trying to see, does this match our belief about what we think is going to happen in a certain situation? So the data will be both legal and non-legal, meaning it will come from court cases, it will come from United Nations human rights law, but also come from people's perceptions and what they believe about the world, which you'll start to call ideology. It'll also come from the rules of the game, and those are different depending on what institution you're in. If you're in education, if you're in law, if you're in a courthouse, if you're in Congress, right? It kind of depends on your environment of what the rules are going to be. And then we want to revisit how this process informs your change in what you thought about the solution to these problems. And I'll tell you now, the solution is not going to be simple. And some of you might not come to a solution. The paper might, you might write about the fact that there's too many competing solutions. And so that's going to have to be dealt with. Some of you might come to the reality that there are some things that can't be solved. Like homelessness cannot be solved using neoliberal capitalist language, right? You can't, this is complex, but if you take your economics classes later, you'll find out that in order to keep the economy growing, you need a certain percentage of people that are unemployed. And that's why the unemployment in the United States never goes to zero. And that's so that you can, in a situation like this, lots of people have lost their jobs. 30 million people have lost their jobs. But lots of people are working in a different capacity than they were before. Lots of folks have moved online, like your teachers. So this is how capitalism kind of, if you wanted to use the metaphor of evolution, right, this is how they kind of survive and adapt. So, my bet would be there'll be a lot, this is my hypothesis, is that the economy will grow in the next few years, but it will be largely based online. And so those people with digital skills or who can, learn quickly are going to do better. They're going to get better jobs than folks who don't. That doesn't mean everybody, right? But there'll be fewer jobs of this 30 million that were lost. It's very unlikely that 30 million jobs will be recreated in the non-digital environment. But I would continue to do research, and then in the next couple of years, I'd check and see, was I correct? So in your introduction, you're spending your time just telling the story. What is this problem? So in my introduction, I would talk about homelessness. Like, what do people think this problem is? And then I would use actor network theory. So in my introduction, I'll talk about Mayor de Blasio and what he says about homelessness. I'll talk about other folks that have particular opinions about what they think homelessness is and who's doing what about it. So that puts the humans into the introduction. So it's not this far-off concept that I'm studying. I'm not doing a book report, right? I'm actually studying how do human beings solve this problem, and that's what you need to do as well. So you need to be concise and clear, and you have to remember to use your actor network theory. I'll remind you of how to do this, but you all did a very good job of this in your own neighborhoods. So I think you understand, right? You get that there are human beings in all these different places, and that they're the ones who make, the decisions. So I don't say something like, people talk like this all the time, but we can't do that in academic papers, right? I can't say something like, the bodega ran out of milk, right? The bodega didn't run out of milk, right? There's an actual reason there's no milk at the local bodega. So the reason could be that the clerk, right, the person who orders the milk, orders 10 gallons every week. And this week, people bought 14 gallons. So there's rational explanations, empirical explanations about how people make decisions. And we just don't tend to talk like that in our everyday talk. But, you're in school, so this is not everyday talk. So in the introduction, you have to be real clear about who the people are. Then you're going to conduct your research, and there's lots of different forms that this could take. So you can read academic articles. You should definitely read our 2 articles, CSI Sciences Wishful Thinking and Basketball in the Key of Law. You should, do one other article, right? I said case here, but article using JSTOR. Then you're going to synthesize those cases, meaning you're only going to do like 1 to 2 paragraphs. And this is going to be in the section following the introduction called the method. So you're just going to pull out the main point in how they studied. And some of you have done a good job with this with CSI Science is Wishful Thinking. You'll remember that what she did was she watched episodes of CSI, and then she analyzed the language that folks used in that TV show. So that's all you would be writing about. You don't need to worry about the conclusion until later in the paper. And so, you're just saying, okay, what are the methods that you're going to use? Are you going to watch TV shows? Are you going to interview people? And so you're going to pull this out from your research articles. And again, I'll help you with this. And if you keep your notes in Google Doc, then I can kind of give you advice as you go along, and this will be a lot easier. And, probably you'll get your paper done quicker. So then you're going to continue in the methods section. So I want you to kind of just read through this real quick. So I want you to literally make a table in your Google Doc, just like I've made. And you'll have those columns there that say the source of your evidence, the language that's used, the symbols, and the ideology. And so when you go to sources, I'm just suggesting, right? You'll make your own decisions about your research, but like when you're looking for possible solutions, probably a great place to start would be a documentary about the problem that you're researching. So I found out recently, I saw that there's a documentary about homelessness in Seattle. I think it's called Tent City, right? So I'm definitely going to watch that, and I'm going to see what do they talk about. So then in my table, I would record what's the language they use. I bet they use neoliberal capitalistic, language. What symbols do they use? That'll be interesting, but it's about tents, right? So there's probably something about tents. And then what ideology, like what is their solution based in? What do they believe is important about the world? You can also do field research, right? And this would be interviews or surveys. So the New York Times, ABC does surveys on lots of different things. Rasmussen is another company that does lots of surveys. And then, sorry, my neighbor is like hyper about vacuuming every day, and it's so loud. I don't know if you all can hear that, but I can hear it. So you want to compare that field research, the interviews and surveys, to the information you get from the documentary, from YouTube, from the academic article, right, from the reports that come from the government agencies or a non-government agency, or the United Nations, right? And then you should consider doing a narrative analysis. So, pick a film or two, right, a popular culture film. I could draw a comparison from homelessness to like zombie films, right, because that's a similarity. I could take some fiction. So Oscar Wilde wrote about homelessness and how people react to it over 100 years ago. So I could compare these things to what is the data that I'm getting now, and that richens my analysis. I have a better story than I'm telling, and I've complicated because I'm looking at more actors within the structure. And then once you have your table, right, and you've got everything kind of in there, I can then help you start to work on the analysis part. But if you don't get the table done, that makes it a lot harder. And I want to say this off the top, right? Less is more. So you don't need to write a paragraph in each of these columns, right? You need to write like 2 sentences and be really clear and concise. So then, you're going to start to use legal evidence to now make your case, right? Now that you have a good idea of the problem, you see what the solutions are, you see who the actors are, you see how they're kind of responding. Then you're going to start looking at these two cases. One is Chevron USA versus Natural Resources, and then the other one is Scott versus Sanford. And I'm going to help you be really specific about how you're going to use these cases. But you can start with the general method, which is called the IRAC method, which is the issue, the rule, the application, and the conclusion. And these are only one page. So you're just reading the case and you're just like, what's the issue? What is the court trying to solve here? I'll give you a hint, right? In Scott versus Sanford, it is whether someone of African descent can be a United States citizen. In Chevron USA, I want you to see it's a little trickier. And so I want you to kind of struggle with that and try to figure out what's the legal issue, because that's going to help us understand logical reasoning and legal evidence. And then you want to think about, like, what are the standards that the court is applying in their reasoning? So what are they saying is necessary in order to pursue some kind of claim in the court? And then finally, we'll apply the relevant federal rules of evidence, and you're going to make an argument for why the judge should accept your evidence and your conclusion. So then you have this part of this same process will be looking at legal evidence and then applying what are called the 3 I's, which is ideology, the instrumentality, and the institution. So what's the mental model that you are relying on? So this is about your ideology, your mental model. What is it you think is important in the story? Then the instrumentality is, well, what legal instrument do you propose using? Do you think it should be a lawsuit, legislation, a policy memo, something else? And then now what is the relationship of the courts, the one that you're using your claim with, to other agencies that would need to actually enforce this solution that you want to propose? And so you'll identify the actors within that category as well. Now, this could be a lot, it'd be a huge paper, but I only want you to do 2 pages. You're just practicing doing this. So this is not going to be the part of the paper that I'm going to grade you heavily on. This is the one I'm going to help you probably the most with. And then in the conclusion, you should answer this question very specifically, and you'll have moved your way up with each of your work. Now you should have a really good answer. So how does the history and the structure of the courts in USA inform the social responses and perceptions of crime, meaning deviance, and the law? And I know, like, at first it's going to seem, well, this doesn't have anything to do with crime. But what's interesting is, and if you took my Intro to Criminal Justice class, you would have learned that, all of this, right? Because law constitutes the entire social relationship. So what we say is good, what we say is bad, what we say is crime, what we say is compliance, is all organized by this relationship in law. And so you're going to start to see the connections, and if you don't, I'll help you with that, right? And you'll see, like, how does this work within the ideology, the instruments, and the institution of law? And in this section, you want to restate your major points from each of the preceding sections. So that's one thing I will be grading you on, is making sure you do that. Are you following instructions? And then I want you to reflect about how the legal research has changed your perception as you went through this process. So you should keep notes on this. So you should say something like, at the beginning of this class, I thought. During my research, I changed my mind. Now I think this. And that will be you applying your understanding and what you remember from the class here on Bloom's Taxonomy. So now I just want to give you your section headings for your paper. So you'll want to take a picture of this or, write it down. You're going to have your section A, and you'll put your headings on this exactly like this. So you have section A, it'll say A, and then you put introduction. In your introduction, you're going to have your thesis and your perfect paragraph. I think you should bold those so that I know exactly what I'm looking for. In section B, the next section, it'll be B and then methods. This is where you're going to put your information from the articles, the reports, your field research, your narrative. You'll see I only want 1 page, 2 pages so far, so you're not doing a ton of writing. You're just trying to get everything down now and clear and concise. Then the one that's going to be, the most work, I think, will be the methods section, and that's because you're learning how to do this. Once you learn how to do this, this will always be the easiest section. But this is going to be looking at the language, the symbols, and the ideology, and this is where your pages, where your table is going to be. So if you can put everything into one table, you should only have a paragraph and then a table. So that would be 1 page. If you are struggling to do a table and you're unable to do it, then you need to have 3 to 5 pages. And that's because if you notice, right, on a table, you can get a lot of information in a short space, in a small space. The next section is D, which will say legal evidence. This is where your cases and your federal rules will be. Again, it's only 1 page because you're going to synthesize the information and apply it. And then 1 page on section E, which is the 3 I's, which is your analysis. And then finally F, your conclusion. And that's where you're going to reflect and answer the question. So I don't, if you did 5 pages with a table, you're good. You did everything that I asked. But it should not be more than 11 pages without a table. If you have 11 pages and a table, now you're in big trouble. And I'll just send it back and say no. But if you went on for 11 pages and you didn't have a table, it's possible. So I'm not gonna restrict that side of it. But the goal should be 5 pages with a table. That does not include the works cited page. So that would just be the last page. And I think this is good for just a broad overview. Not trying to do anything crazy here. Just get you basically familiar with what you'll be doing for the rest of the semester. And this is really it. So you should know how you're doing based on our conversations with each other. So if you haven't started your paper, then you're not doing very well. If you and I have talked with each other over Google Docs, then you're doing very well. Even if you're struggling, you're doing very well because I can talk to you in Google Docs. If we haven't started talking in Google Docs, let's try to start that conversation right after the midterm.